Welcome to The Sober Unicorn. We are a gay-hosted, all-inclusive podcast about sobriety and addiction recovery for the LGBT plus community and all of our allies. I am your host, Holden, and thank you for joining us today. Well, hello, everybody. It's Holden back here again with The Sober Unicorn. If my voice sounds a little crazy, I had to yell at my boss and yell at people the other day. So, my voice is a little, I guess I'm losing it, which is weird because I'm a loud person and I've never lost my voice. But today we have somebody that I've been following for quite a bit on Instagram for probably, I think I've been following you for about a year now.
That sounds better than it actually sounds there. Holden.
We've when I first started the Sober Unicorn podcast, I was looking up sober profiles and kind of just follow people that gave me inspiration as well. And this is somebody that he lives the program, he lives recovery, and he lives unapologetically and lives out loud. So he enjoys his life. So I mean, I asked him what about a week ago, and I was like, "Come on the podcast, please." And he's like, "Sure." So we have him on. Hello, Jason.
Hi, Holden. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous. How are you?
I'm fabulous as well.
Good. What have you been up to today?
It was a typical Saturday. I started with the gym, which was completely new for me. I mean, before recovery, I would never be up at 5:30 a.m. I would probably just be going back to sleep or still up. Now I get to start my day with a little pump and, just feeling good about myself. And, I'll talk a little bit about my body image and my story. But it's a great way to start my day now. And now I get to play with my puppies and be on your podcast.
Well, that's 5:30 in the morning is absolutely outrageous.
A
I
little bit.
know that what was that? I saw something on Instagram. It's like if you go to the gym between 5 and 7, you want people to know you're serious about you're working out. And it's like if I go to the gym, which I am trying to do, I normally try to go around 7.
Yep.
Like
It's
5
a good time.
a.m. That's just it's inhuman to be
It's
awake there.
obnoxious. It's a little obnoxious, honestly. But, my partner and I have a crazy schedule, between both of our jobs. And like I said, I just got a puppy and she's almost 5 months old and she has to be on that schedule, just like I did in early recovery, honestly. I mean, talk about the comparison. You need to be on that schedule. And that's what's working for her so far.
Good, good. Yeah, puppies can be a nightmare, but also bring so much happiness into a home.
For sure.
So why don't you kind of tell everybody kind of where you were at in your addiction, like what were you addicted to, and um, kind of the chaos of it before you went into recovery.
For sure. So I'll start with my sobriety date is July 27th, 2020. So I have a little over 4.5 years. I have tried to get sober for probably the last 15, maybe even 20 years. And I was a chronic relapser. Um, and I'll just note now that I was at a sober roundup over the weekend, and there was a speaker who said, he was at a meeting and he was walking down the stairs, and someone said his name and said, "Oh, that's a chronic relapser." And he made the comparison. He said, "Yes, relapse is part of my story, which is part of my story too." But he said, "I might be a relapser, but I'm also resilient." And I love that. I love that. And resiliency is a huge part of my life. So, alcohol was my first love. And that led to other things like cocaine and crystal meth. And my drugs of choice are alcohol and crystal meth. I had the ABCs. Alcohol became crystal. But, towards the end, it was crystal that was allowing me to continue to drink more. I grew up in a very small, conservative, blue collar town, which taught me some great family values. But it was really hard growing up there as I started to learn about my sexuality and become the gay man that I am today. I didn't really drink when I was in middle school or high school. I probably had my first drink at like 18 years old. And I was a blackout drinker from the beginning. So it was right after graduation. A friend of mine had a farm. I'm telling you, small town. And his parents took all of our keys, bought us a bunch of kegs. We were out in tents and with all of the cigars and like all these people. And I blacked out immediately. I I remember this. I woke up out of my blackout in a tent. I threw up and I asked where the beer was. And so like my addiction was from the start. And I never learned that lesson. I never learned that lesson. When I went to college, I joined a fraternity my first year in my second semester as soon as I possibly could because I wanted friends. Um, and it was a drinking house. We had access to booze 24/7. And in fact, we had this restaurant bar down in town where we could walk in and the bartenders just knew to serve us because of who our fraternity was. And it helped that we tipped them a lot, but we never got carded and we just would drink there all the time. And that's when in college my consequences kind of started. But throughout my entire story, I never thought that I had consequences. I've been arrested. I've been in jail. I have lost relationships and jobs and friends. I have wrecked probably 17 cars, but I never thought that I had consequences because I always had someone to bail me out, which were my parents. And throughout my career of drinking, it was just that. It was episode, apology, episode, apology, episode, apology. And I would always get away with everything, either because people just left my life and I didn't have to deal with it, or my dad took care of it and I didn't have to reap the consequences of my actions.
So 17 cars, let me just say that.
Yeah,
That is ludicrous.
it is. It
I've
is.
never wrecked one car, but I mean, I can imagine
Wow.
like after maybe the 3rd car, I'd be like, "Okay, something's going on here."
Yeah, for real, for real. And I never learned my lesson.
So do you think that the drinking, as you said, like it was kind of when you were coming to terms with your sexuality, do you think it was you were running from that? Or is it just because, like, as you said, the first time that you blacked out, you woke up and wanted a beer? So do you think the alcoholic behavior was already there, or do you think you were running from something?
I definitely think it was already there. I think it was already there. I think I used a lot as an excuse for my drinking. Oh, I'm starting to like guys. I can't. I have to hide that. I remember I was living with one of my fraternity brothers after college and we would go out drinking and then I would disappear, go to the gay bar and come home like blackout drunk. And I think it was a combination of the two a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, man, I've never I came out at such a young age that I never had to
Mm.
like deal with that battle. So I mean, I can't imagine being already 20 years old, 18 to 20-ish, and having to then come to terms with sexuality. I mean, I kind of knew I was gay when I was like 12 and came out at like 14. So
Gotcha. Yep, yep. I mean, there were signs, right? I have played soccer since I was 5 years old. And my dad told me a story during one of my first games. I was in the backfield and just picking the dandelions out of the grass. I mean, I grew out of that, but also I was listening to Broadway shows. I mean, Madonna was my idol, and so like there were signs.
yeah.
Um, yeah, for sure.
So you talked about going to the roundup. How was that experience this past weekend?
The roundup was incredible. So it's the Spirit by the Sea Rehoboth Roundup in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. It's every February, and it's amazing to be around 350 gay, sober people and just have the sense of community around you and the sense of sobriety. We had people there they did a countdown from 1 day to over 50 years. And it's just incredible to have that sense of security when you're walking into a building. And you're just there with living a sober life for an entire weekend. It's great.
Of course, and if you're not near Delaware, they do roundups throughout all this. I
Yes.
don't know if they're all 50 states, but I would say most states. I know Florida has their own.
Yep.
Dallas has what's called the Big D Roundup with a double
Mm.
entendre.
Yep.
And it's incredible. I've been to the Big D, and it's just the insanity of how many people can come together. And as you said, I mean, there was somebody there from 1 day all the way to several decades. That's crazy to me that people find that place and find that
Yep.
recovery altogether, no matter how much clean time or sober time one may have.
It's funny. So I equate it to my old life in a way. So after I grew up in that small town, I moved to New York City. And when I hit New York City, I became a circuit kid. Like I was a circuit boy through and through. And I traveled the world going to circuit parties. And going into a space with hundreds of guys, like enjoying the music and doing drugs, of course, even though you don't have to when you go to circuit parties now. But I see the roundup like that too. Like I go and I travel and I be with my people, except my people now are sober people.
Yeah. Yeah, which is good. I mean, sober people are a lot more fun to be around than intoxicated or drugged out people in these
For
days.
me, for sure.
So, at what point, like, of course, you were drinking, got into several legal troubles, got into several accidents, and that wasn't enough for you to stop. So,
Yeah.
what was the breaking point for you to finally realize that you needed help?
Yeah, so I have had a lot of bottoms in my recovery and my story, but the last one I had really started introducing crystal meth a lot. I was a daily user. Um, I was daily drinking. I was so weak because I wasn't eating that I could barely pick my head up off of the couch to drink out of my bottle. And I was in a 7 day blackout and don't remember a thing except I woke up out of this blackout driving my car on the highway. And the only flash of memory that I have still to this day is that I was leaving a hotel. And I don't know what I was doing there, who I was meeting there, but I was driving down the highway. I come out of this blackout and I had like that God moment or that higher power moment where something inside me said, okay, listen, you've been doing this for 2 decades. You either take this exit, which was coming up in a mile, you go to another hotel, go back to that hotel, go continue to do what you're doing, probably until you die, or you go straight, you go home, and you go to rehab. And fortunately, I decided to go straight, well, forward. And I called my dad on the way home because I was like, if I don't call him now, I won't ever call him.
Mhm.
I said, Dad, I need help. I'm going home. I have issues with drugs and alcohol. And honestly, I'm paraphrasing because I don't even remember what I said. But essentially, I said, I need help. And he said, go home. I'll be there in the morning. And I, I don't recommend this, but I uh, dried out by myself for like 2 days. And it was bad. It was really, really bad. And I do not recommend that at all. But I got myself to rehab. And that started my journey. That started my journey for me.
I mean, drying up for 2 days and going through that miserableness in 2 days probably assisted you not going back,
For sure.
because I know a lot of people that go to rehab immediately and they get all the comfort medication. They don't have a horrible detox experience
Yep.
because 'cause they're all medicated out, so it's like, "Oh,
Yep.
well, my detox was not bad," but those that, like, white knuckle it through the detox process. It's like, oh hell no. Like I'm not
Oh, for
dealing
sure.
with this shit again.
Yeah. I mean, I was so fucked up that even after the day and a half or whatever it was, my dad got there and I was still detoxing, that I was still eligible to get into rehab. They drew my blood and they were like, okay, we're admitting you right away. And so, like, there was no question about it.
Yeah. How was your rehab experience?
I will tell you that I was nervous to go to rehab. I was the type of alcoholic and addict that said, okay, if you ever go to rehab, you actually have a problem, which was fucked up considering the 17 cars, 3 arrests, lost relationships. But if I went to rehab, then I was actually an alcoholic and addict. Um, but when I got there, and I did get, a lot of medications, I got chance to sleep. And then when I got up after a day or two, I said, you have to dive into this with both feet. You can't fuck around, and you have to actually do the work. And it was great because I made that conscious decision to actually do it. I wasn't fighting it. I had literally surrendered. And there are a lot of different personalities in rehab, and I only have one experience. Um, but I found my people within the facility. I mean, um, I had the sober podcast, and I started that with two of the guys that I went to rehab with, and I found people that I could really make my own, and I I just surrendered to it. It was great, and I did go to a rehab that was a little bit more posh than some. We got a chance to play kickball and dodgeball, and we had, all of the things like movie nights and all this kind of stuff. But it wasn't like, you know, a resort either. And I just dove into it.
Yeah. I mean, rehab in general, I don't think is super fun for anybody. I mean, I,
Mm,
I work in the industry and I will tell you the friendships that are forged in rehab usually last years because it's like essentially it's a trauma bond
yep.
and nobody that's never been to treatment will ever understand what you went through while in treatment,
Yep.
especially those that participated. So of course you go through treatment, you get home, you're doing okay for a while. And as you said, you were a relapser. So
Mhm.
like what did you like what were you doing to stay sober for that bit? And then what was going through your mind before you picked up again?
Yeah. So I knew that once I got out of rehab, I knew because I was a relapser, I needed to get to a meeting. The thing is that it's the middle of COVID. So I didn't have any meetings to go to. And I got my ass into a Zoom meeting. And so this time around, I'm a Zoom baby. And I went to meetings sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times a day for the first year. And as the world was starting to open up again, I started to fellowship. And then I started going to in person meetings. And I I wanted to make sure that I was shrouding myself with the sobriety that I wanted and the safety of AA and the safety of my 12 step programs. And I just needed to dive into it. Just like I did in rehab, I needed to become my 12 step program.
So let's talk about the 12-step program. So it's surrounded by spirituality, the word God or higher power. Um, as being a gay man, with most I would say gay people have some sense of a religious trauma.
Yep.
Um, how did you move past that in order to have a relationship with your God?
Great question. So I am a former Catholic. That's how I grew up. I mean, I was an altar boy and Eucharistic minister and the whole thing. Um, and I used I used that religion and that experience because as I became more and more aware of the world, the the preachings and teachings of the Catholic Church weren't aligning with my values. I still think that organized religion is not for me. It might be for you or others or your listeners, but it's not for me because I see the hypocrisy in a lot of what is being said and done. However, I wanted to make sure that I lived through the second and third step, which is all around that idea of the higher power. And as I was talking to my sponsor about it, I told him everything that I just said. And I said, I don't know what God is. In fact, this is what has kept me out for a while as an excuse. Really, I just wanted to keep drinking and drugging, but I used it as an excuse. I don't want to come back to church and all this other kind of stuff. And he said, okay, tell me what your higher power could look like. And I said, I don't know. It's everything and nothing. It's all around me. It connects me to people and places and things. And like, it's just in everything and it's in me. And, part of my story is that I lost my mom um, 13 years ago. And I said, it's even connecting me and my mom. And he said, that sounds like a great higher power. How would you identify that? And I said, well, the energy between all of us is connected. And he's like, exactly. Your higher power is energy. And I was like, mind blown. Like, it's not this, old white guy in the sky on a cloud in a white robe like I grew up with. It's energy that connects me to you, to the listeners, to my dogs, to my partner, to the earth. Like, it is everything. It can't be created nor destroyed. And so that's what my higher power is. And that's how and I do call it God because it's easier for me, but that's what my higher power is. When I say God, I think energy, which means that that old man in the cloud, yeah, it could be that if I want it to be one day, or it could be something completely different because energy is always shifting. If I knock my hand on this table right now, energy's passing in between both of us. And that's what I love about my higher power is that it gives and it takes.
Yeah, that was very similar to the higher power that I used for the longest was the power of the universe.
Mm,
Like essentially like law of attraction, the energy. What energy you're putting out is what you're going to receive back in.
yep.
Um because tons of religious trauma in the past and I was like, fuck God, fuck this. I'm not doing church. I'm not reading the Bible and I'm just like even for like the first 6 months, I would not do the Lord's Prayer at the end of the
Mm,
meeting because I was like, I
yeah.
can't, I just can't. But after a while, I was like, you know what? Like, if this is what's going to help me stay away from drugs, stay away from alcohol, then like, what is so wrong with saying the word God?
Yeah.
Like, what is so wrong in believing something that I'm not used to believing in?
Yep. For
So
sure.
that's what helped me a lot. So you talked about having a sober podcast. So
Yes.
kind of what was your motivation behind it? How long did you guys go and what was your decision behind ending the podcast?
Sure. So it was called Sober Solutions Podcast. You could probably still find us out there somewhere. Honestly, it was quite selfish. It was selfish in the fact that we wanted to stay sober. We didn't care if another person listened to it. We got to kiki with each other. And of course, it was me and like a bunch of straight guys. And so, like, but we just had the best time just talking and sharing our feelings and our ideas on different topics. And then we started adding guests and hearing their stories and, talking about their experiences. And, I wasn't able to participate in this because, my mother has passed, but we had the moms on and they talked about how for the other two hosts, like their experience with their kids as alcoholics and addicts and just being able to stay sober for one other day. And we went for a couple years. I don't recall how long. um, but we we had to end. We had our producer decide to move on, and Chris and I were not technologically savvy, and so all of the background stuff is a little over my head.
No, try I like try people always ask me, "Well, why do you just use the mic in the computer?" I'm like, "Have you seen a Rodecaster? You see how many fucking buttons are on that thing?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
"There's no way that I could ever do, like, the Rodecaster video or the" it's like a huge contraption with, like, 40 different buttons and knobs, and I'm like, "I
Ugh,
can't.
it's too
Can't do
much.
it."
Too much.
They just need to create, like, one little thing, plug in the mics, call it a day,
There
and
you go. That would be nice, right? But
I mean,
that's not how it works.
we have AI now. Can't AI figure it out?
I wouldn't be surprised if it could very soon.
Yeah, yeah, eventually. So like you were talking about being selfish. So like when I first started, it was kind of similar to that as well. But eventually, it was just kind of as long as one person listened
Yeah,
and got something, people are like, "Well, do you make any money from it? Why aren't you charging for episodes?" And I'm like,
yeah,
"Why would I do that? Why would
yeah,
I ever charge somebody for recovery?
yeah.
Like, I
We
don't get
we
charged."
exactly. We went through the same thing. We actually had several companies reach out to us, and the first one was actually a non-alcoholic beer that we had to actually have a meeting about. Like, is this something that we would want to pursue? Being a sober podcast and non-alcoholic beer, even though it's not alcohol, how would we feel? Would that trigger people? Like, there's a lot of consideration around it. And
Mhm.
finally, we got back to our core of like, we're just here to stay sober. We're not here to make money off of this. Um, and yeah, if one person did listen, great. And we were able to get um, many emails from people from around the world that said, I appreciate listening to you. And, I'm sure that you get the same from your listeners, that it's a great way just to zone out for 20, 30, 40 minutes.
Yeah, no, I do. I get, mostly Instagram messages, and I'm
Yeah.
hoping, like, I see on the analytics that I'm in, like, 46-ish countries,
Great.
and I'm hoping, like, my next goal is to get one person from, like, every country to guest on the podcast.
Awesome. So if
Yeah.
you're from a different country outside the United States, message Holden right now. Send him an Instagram message and say, I want to be on your podcast.
What's funny, the UK has so many listeners, so I've had guests from the UK, South Africa, Mexico, and I think Canada. And
Awesome.
guest wise, but so all right, I think for many people, the subject of sex comes
Ooh.
up, especially with meth users.
Hmm.
So I know most likely both of us, once we removed the alcohol, once we removed the meth, we had to find ourselves again sexually, who we were as sexual beings, especially in a relationship. So how did you navigate your sex life after removing meth and alcohol?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. So, as I was going through my early recovery, my sponsor never said I couldn't have sex. He never said that I couldn't date. He, recommended that I didn't. Um, I didn't listen to him. I had sex with someone, um, and we kind of went on a date. Um, and immediately afterwards, like a day or two afterwards, I called him and I was like, I know you're 8 years younger than me, but how do you tell someone that you don't want to date them anymore? And he was like, what? I was like, my old self would either ghost this person or be so much of a bitch that they would just stop talking to me. So how do I do this in a sober way? And he coached me through it, and it was great. The sex was okay. I'm glad I got it out of the way, because I had a lot of really crazy sex as a crystal meth user. I will just admit that, like very very often, very hot. I won't glorify it, but it was hot sex. Um, and it wasn't until my current relationship. where I found the same thing. I have incredible sex with my partner, and we're open. I have incredible sex with a lot of people, and I can do it in a sober way because I am more present. It's not a trigger for me. Now, I've been to a bathhouse, I've been to a spa, I've, you know, done the group and the threesome stuff, all the interesting things. But I still can't go to certain places like the Eagle in New York. I can't go there. In fact, I walk right past the street. It's still a trigger for me 4.5 years later because I am sure that part of my soul is still on the floor somewhere, So I just need to know who I am. I think that's everything. Like, I can't avoid my triggers. I learned very early on in my recovery through my sponsors that, like, I cannot avoid my triggers. I need to deal with them unless they are so far ingrained in who I am that if I don't avoid them, then it's going to become a problem. But sex has become freeing for me. It early on it was kind of hard to navigate, but I talked to my sponsor. I did pause after I had sex with that one guy in like my first 4 months or whatever it was. Like, I paused for a little while. I did not jump into a relationship in my first year. Um, and that was just by my choice because I'm the priority. And I couldn't uh, bring myself to being in a relationship where it was like we're both in this together. No, girl, I needed to date myself first because my self-esteem was in the toilet, like in the toilet. And I had to learn how to love myself. That old cliche of like, love yourself before you can love someone else. Yeah, okay, but that's fucking hard.
Hmm.
And it took me a while to be able to do that. And honestly, 4.5 years later, I'm just learning to do that again. Because in early recovery, I started loving myself. And then around my 2.5, 3 year mark, I lost that. And it's taken me up till now to start loving myself again. And it's a process and it's a journey. And, it is what it is.
I mean, have you ever been to a hookup though where you didn't realize that they were a user and you had to be put in a weird situation? I mean, for example, this was like 2 months after me moving to Florida and I was sober, and I go to a hookup of somebody that I had relapsed with like a
Mm,
year prior. And he was saying that he was on the straight and arrow, and I was like, all right, bet. So I go over there to literally see the pipe and the torch just sitting there. Like,
yeah.
I didn't know what to do.
Well, no judgment, but if I relapse with the person, girl, I'm not going to hook up with them again. But to your question, surprisingly, no, because I know the signs. I know the signs. I know if you send me a picture of a certain thing, or if you have a message in a certain way, or you're like talking about specific things, I'm like, girl, you're high, or you definitely party, or I just block you immediately. Like, I
Yeah.
have to make sure that I protect myself.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've been very fortunate in, that like I haven't, because my first year of recovery, I was not on the apps. I was not fucking around. I was not, I was just like, I did keep it in the circle a little bit. I dated a guy in recovery for a quick minute. And then I am now in this relationship for over 3 years. And he's sober. And we weren't monogamous at the beginning. And then we had guest stars, and now we're open. And now it's like, I have enough time that like I can spot you quick. But, I think that people have to be smart. If you're a recovered crystal meth addict, you know what you used to do, you know how you used to speak. And if you catch a whiff of that, block.
Yeah. Or you just stay off a grinder because that's the primary
If
source.
that helps. I mean, Scruff was my easy access to drugs. Like
I never
Grinder, not
found it
so
on Scruff.
much. Oh, and I found crystal meth in Grand Forks, North Dakota. I could find it anywhere.
Like, Grinder was my go-to because normally Scruff, they still had standards, for men, and so, like, Grinder was the people that were like, "Nah, I'm just ready to get into it," so that was my type of, like.
How interesting. I had the exact opposite experience. Scruff is like Scruff was like the Sniffies before Sniffies was
Oh my
Sniffies.
god. You know what? Sniffies was crazy, like, that was, of course, before, like, Sniffies came in more after my recovery. Well, that's when I found it, and I was like I would just go on there to be like, "What the hell are people posting as their photos?" I'm like, "These nasty ass queens," because
I mean,
Grinder and all these other apps don't allow you to post,
yeah.
like, nudity, but Sniffies
Yep.
was one that,
Oh yeah.
like, you could post anything. I was just
I
like,
mean,
"Oh my god."
Sniffies is efficient, right? If you're like looking for it right here and now, like in the backyard or the barn or something, like that's where you go. Be careful because there's like Holden, like you just said, like the standards aren't great. So be careful. I mean, it's the same thing as the rest of recovery. Like whether you're on the apps or not, whether you go to bathhouses and saunas or not, whether you are going to a sober conference and they have a dance, just be fucking smart. Like the number one rule that I have is put my recovery first.
Mhm.
Everything else can fall by the wayside. Like if I see a hot guy and oh yeah, he maybe smokes weed or does other things, like I'll find another hot guy. Like it's not that consequential.
Yeah,
It's not worth a relapse. And fucking trust me, just like you, I've relapsed over many, many boys.
yeah.
I was in love with my drug dealer at one point. I mean, he was pretty hot though.
Uh, that's how
And
I didn't
straight.
pay for a lot of my meds. I would just
Yeah.
suck for it. But, I mean, I personally feel too is if you are not in a place in your recovery to where you could see somebody's profile or surpass that hot guy that does drugs, then just stay off the app. Like, get
Yeah.
to a place in your recovery that you are able to say no via on the app, because if you go and meet that person and they have it there and you didn't realize it, you will definitely not be in a position to say no then if you can say no via, like, digitally. Um,
A
so
hundred
get on
percent. A
get on the
hundred
apps when you're
percent.
ready.
Yep. I mean, like you said, just be smart and put your recovery first.
Yeah.
Like sex is great and you will have a lot of wonderful sex, trust me, but it's not worth your life.
Yeah, it took me a long time to learn because, I mean, I, sleep on the bottom bunk, and when you're a meth user, it's very insatiable. While when you're not on meth, it's you have to like relearn how to train your body to handle certain things and stuff like that. So like it took me a long time to start enjoying it again. And
Mm,
it wasn't until the current partner that I have that I was actually finally able to say, okay, these were fetishes and kinks I was into, but you know what? I'm really not into those anymore. I want to try this, not try that. So it's finally that experimental phase where I don't have to be high to do it,
yep.
um, which is a huge blessing. And I can enjoy it and be done and not have to worry about getting on Grinder to find the fourth, fifth, 10th, 15th one to run through me that night.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. The obsession is just not there. It's all enjoyment when you do it right.
Exactly. So talking about relationships, okay, you as you said, your partner's sober. So have you found it, especially you're sober 4.5 years, y'all have been together 3 years. So y'all have spent quite a bit of time in recovery together.
Yep.
Do you find it as important to make sure y'all's recovery is separate while also having recovery together?
Yeah. So we have never been to a meeting together. We've talked about it, but I draw a line. And maybe one day we'll go to a meeting together, but I want him to have his journey just like I want to have my journey. And maybe once in our relationship, he's ever said, you need to go to a meeting. Um, Most of the time, though, because he has 13 years of recovery, he knows what the fuck he's doing. Um, I mean, It's been the best relationship I've ever been in. His crazy matches my crazy. His love matches my love. Like it's a perfect fit for us. And I just don't want, I need my space. Just like I need my friends and he needs his friends. I need my recovery and he needs his recovery. And it's great because we get to do that. Like he didn't come to the roundup with me. I went to a sober retreat on Labor Day. He didn't come with me. One, it's not his thing, but two, it's like that's my space. That's my time.
Mhm.
We're together a lot. We're together a lot, and I need my space. And honestly, like just like I'm in therapy too, and just like I bitch to my therapist about him sometimes, I need a bitch in a meeting about him, and I don't need him there,
Mhm.
because I'll censor myself a little bit, maybe not consciously, but it is what it is.
Do you ever find it when y'all are in an argument or just a small disagreement that when you guys are like, "Hey, you know what? Maybe you should call your sponsor." Like
No, no, fortunately. However, he has said, have you talked to Armistead lately? Which is my sponsor's name. And I was like, I think I need to give him a call. He's like, that would be a really good idea. I really encourage that. But we
Yeah,
don't weaponize it. We don't weaponize it at
okay.
all.
Because so many people in recovery, I call them with a problem and just, like, to vent, and they're like, "Have you prayed about it?" I'm like, "Bitch, shut the fuck up. I just
Yeah.
need a vent right now."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I do that shit with my sponsees, you know. Um, but there are a lot of times where like I'll call someone or someone calls me and they just want to fucking talk. They don't need to be slapped in the face with the big book. They don't need to be told, okay, go to a meeting. They don't need to be told, meditate and pray about it. Now, are those solutions? Probably. But sometimes I just want to fucking cry or scream or vent about something. And the best part about being a sober person is that I get to listen.
Mhm,
And that helps my recovery when someone does it for me. And I feel like it helps others' recovery when I do it for them so much more than telling them which step that they're fucking up because they're complaining about something or like, do a fourth step. I mean, I get it, but let me get through this chaos for a second and then I can get back on the train because I have you as a fellow and I trust you enough to call and complain about this stuff. I don't need to be slapped in the face with the 12 steps, you know.
yes, we just need to be slapped in the face with something else. Yeah.
That typically works too to shut me up.
So before we end the episode, is there like anything that you haven't said that you would like to say or say to somebody that could be still struggling right now with addiction?
Yeah, if you're struggling with addiction right now, know that you're worth recovery. It might seem scary. It might seem like your life is over if you get into recovery, but I'm a living example that my life got 100 times better. I literally got all of the cash and prizes that is the ideal recovery, but what I got back is my life so that I can show up as the person that I am. And even for those who might have years of recovery too, like be a shining example for the person who's going to pick up today. Like show up, show up for them. There's sometimes chaos in meetings and people forget that we're all there for the same fucking purpose is not to die because I was almost dead and people showed up for me. So if you have a day of recovery today, show up for yourself. If you have 10 years of recovery today, show up for someone else.
That's a good way to put it. So, if anybody resonates with your story and wants to see you on social media or wants to listen to any of the episodes that you and your podcast put out, where can they find you guys at?
Sure. So, Sober Solutions podcast is on all of the socials. I would say check out our Instagram where you can see all of our podcasts and clips. It's Sober Solutions Podcast, one word. We're also on Apple Music and Spotify. And my personal Instagram is Rudabega82, Rudabega 82. I love to hear from people, so please feel free to add me and shoot me a message.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us today. I hope you have a fabulous day. Thank you
Thanks,
for
Holden. I
listening
hope
to our
you have a
episode.
fabulous day.
If you want to
Thank
be
you.
notified about every new episode release, hit that subscribe button. Make sure to check out our website at thesoberunicornpodcast.com. Don't forget, everybody, don't be normal, be a unicorn, but better yet, be a sober unicorn.